Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. Particularly, I'm excited that you all braved the rain and now thunder and lightning to be here. So I better tell you a good story. The pressure's on. I am here today to tell you that I am a student of storytelling. I am a teacher of storytelling at USC Annenberg. And what I'm interested in is teaching people how to tell stories that help them create worlds that they can actually live in. But I'm not here to teach you about storytelling today. I'm here to tell you a very personal story. So let me begin by giving you a little bit of a framework. What I want you to keep in mind today is this idea of uploading, right? We upload all kinds of things, particularly to the internet, files that we want to save, important posts that we make. But really, when we think about uploading, I also want us to think about the spiritual dimensions of the term. This idea that we might be going somewhere. Technologists tell us that we're saving all of this information to the cloud. It makes us think of heaven, right? Steve Jobs and Guy Kawasaki absolutely studied evangelical theology and evangelical communication in order to help spread the message about Apple computers. So I think it bears some thinking when we think about technology and when we think about this word uploading. And when I think about what it means to upload something, I think of 5 P's. First, I think of power. We have to be plugged in, right, in order to upload something. We have to have the power to believe that we have something worth uploading, that there's something worth saving. Then we have to have a place, right? So we want to save our documents from wherever they're stored to somewhere else in the cloud. We also then are concerned with who we are as people, right? What is important to me, what I may want to upload may be very different than what you or you or you want to upload. And so we need to think about who we are as people when we think about uploading our identities and our information. Finally, we need to know how to upload things. So what's the procedure for uploading something and making sure that what we keep is safe? And finally, this idea that we heard about earlier this afternoon of posting things online. And as I began to think about what it means to upload myself, my data, my stories, I thought of myself not as I am today, a teacher of storytelling and communication, but actually a kid from Queens, New York, who loved to share and loved to tell stories. I have to say, I think I was pretty cute, especially in my Snow White dress, I'm just saying. And one of the things, when I was talking to my mom in preparation for thinking about some stories that I would tell you today, was I said, Mom, if you could describe me as a child, Marcia was blank. Always talking is what Mom said, right? Always had a story to tell. And she reminded me of when she asked me what I wanted for my 5th or 6th birthday, which is around the time that you see me here. And she said, I wanted a set of books. And she thought, oh boy, who do we have here? And the set of books my parents wound up giving me as lifelong educators themselves, I'll never forget it actually. There were a set of child biographies. And the one that I remember breaking into first and loving and having just this profound impact on me, it's one of the reasons I've become an educator, is the story of Helen Keller. And one of the quotations that I've never forgotten from Ms. Keller is the following: "The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart." And I think that's the formula for telling stories. And I think we've heard that a lot throughout the messages and the stories that we've heard this afternoon. And so when I think about that, I think it also applies to the people who tell stories. And so as I think about myself as this kid from Queens who loved to read these autobiographies, definitely a dork from birth, I have to admit, right? I think of one of the favorite storytellers that I had besides these books, and that was my grandfather, my mother's father. He was a poet and a reverend from Cuba who emigrated with my mom and my Aunt Marcia and my grandma to the United States in the 1940s. And I have all of these pictures to share with you about my grandpa and who he was, and what I realize I'm doing is actually sharing one of his old sermons with you today by way of a story. But I couldn't find any picture to Ms. Keller's point, that actually captured my grandpa's personality. Until I found this one. This is a picture of the F train. I don't know if there are any New Yorkers in the crowd, but if there are, okay, so there's 2 of us, 3 of us, who rode that F train, that iron horse, every day. And when I think about the train, and I still ride the train here in LA, it's usually just me by myself riding the train in LA, right? What I love about the train is that you can feel it coming before you hear it or you see it coming. And that's exactly how I felt about my grandpa and the stories and the sermons that he would tell. You could feel them coming before you could see or hear them coming. And there was one story I remember my grandpa telling me as we were actually riding the F train one day from Queens to the city, to Manhattan. And it goes a little something like this. I'm translating it as I speak from his writings, which are in Spanish, so bear with me. But the story goes like this. One day, there were 2 men seated on a wagon of a train, and they were really animated, and they were having a really important conversation. And one employee from the train came in and said, "Excuse me, sirs, but you have to leave this car or this wagon from the train." And they said, "Well, why? We're doing just fine here. In fact, we're having a really important conversation." And the employee from the train said, "I don't doubt it, but there's a problem. You see, this train is not connected to the train that's actually leaving the station. So what do you think these 2 gentlemen did?" And he asked me, "Marcia, what do you think these 2 guys did?" And I said, "Well, of course, Grandpa, they got up and they went to the other part of the train that was moving." And he said, "Exactly." And it's just like that for us in life when we think about the Creator. If we are not connected to the Creator, to that train that's moving, then we can be sharing and having these very animated conversations, but we might not actually be going anywhere. And so when I think about this idea of sharing, I began to think, well, okay, this doesn't just apply to our social situations, but it might also apply to how we share ourselves in prayer. And so as I began to think about how to update and upload these ideas from my grandpa's for you today, I immediately turned to the Lord's Prayer. And I realized that there wasn't just an example here in how to pray, but an example of how to tell any good story, particularly a story online for social media. I know it sounds a little weird, but go with me here. So the prayer says, "Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." So if you're like me and my students who I tried this talk out on earlier this week at USC, you're saying, what in the world is going on here? But I think there are 5 key themes that come out through the Lord's Prayer that not only should guide the way we think about uploading our prayers to the cloud, so to speak, but also how we upload our identities and informations online. So here we go. The first thing I'd like us to think about is who we're following. Or if we're teaching basic communication, it would be who's your audience? Who's following you? Consider them. Who are you talking to? Who are you telling this story to? Where are they located? Why are they there? Do they know your voice? If so, then that gets us to the next thing I'd like us to think about, or the attitude with which we tell our stories. So for those of you who like online things as I do and like Angry Birds as I do, you'll recognize one of those birds here. And don't let his kind of angry face bother you. That's how all New Yorkers look sometimes, right? But the idea here behind this idea of attitude is we have to know not only who we're talking to or who's following us and who we're following, but what our audience wants to do and what's in it for them. And so it got me to thinking about the most compelling stories that I've ever heard. And those are those stories that grab my time and attention and make me feel like I've invested that time and attention wisely. And so when we tell important stories, whether it's online or in prayer, I want us to think about that. Think about what our audience is really interested in. What will make God or our friends online feel as though the time and attention they've invested in us has been worth something. Then there's the notice of invitation, right? So we want to invite people into our stories. We want to know, or we want others to know what we want to do, how we want to get there, and what we need to get the story told. And to me, that means that we have to get in agreement with our audience, whether that's with something that we might have been called to do by the creator and may not feel like doing. Sometimes for me, that's teaching a lesson, to be honest, right? Other times, it might be understanding and presenting an invitation to our audience. You know, every time we tell a story, we're inviting people into our lives. And so I really would like us to think of these stories as invitations in this way. The fourth thing that we can learn from the Lord's Prayer about stories is what it means to tell. And I think it means a few things to tell. One thing it means is that when we tell a story, we're making ourselves vulnerable, and that people can sense that, and that people like that. And that one of the things that the best stories tell us is sometimes about things that need to be undone, things that maybe are uncomfortable, things where we've made a mistake, committed an error, and show that perhaps we don't take ourselves as seriously as we think we do. It requires, as it says in the Lord's Prayer, for us to humble ourselves and think about what that means and how that can create an invitation to others. Think about the attitude that that reflects. Think about how that will help others who might want to follow us to hear our voices. So once we've told, then we hold. And when I think of holding, I think of knowing how to connect here, knowing how to hold on to the relationships that we create in our stories, how to be honest, how to be authentic and sincere, how to be transparent, and perhaps like any great storyteller would tell us, how to be short and to the point. But it's more than that. It's really holding on to the opportunity that every story gives us, every prayer gives us to share something of ourselves with someone else. You know, what inspired me most about Helen Keller when I was a little girl was this idea that she couldn't communicate, or I thought she couldn't communicate because she couldn't see and she couldn't hear, but yet she was an amazing storyteller. And it's this idea of holding on to something that goes beyond that seems to be the key here, at least for me. So when all this comes together, we get this great little acronym, my grandpa would be proud, of faith, right? We tell good stories by understanding who we're following and who's following us, by understanding the attitude that our audience has, by inviting them into the way that we see the world, by telling about ourselves, about what makes us imperfect, and then by holding on to the relationships that we've created. And I think that really is a demonstration for us of faith, of this idea of uploading, of this idea that trusting that the stories that we send really are going somewhere, really are meaningful, and really do make other people feel that the time and attention they've invested in us could be very well spent. So, what does all of this mean, and how does this connect to this crazy accessory I'm wearing on my face? So, I realize that there are a lot of things we need to think about in the digital age when it comes to sharing, as well as when it comes to prayer and praying. And there's a great new app for Google Glass, which is what I'm wearing. That's called the Prayer Advisor. And at first it struck me a little crazy. I thought, well, I'm supposed to go into a closet and pray by myself. Why should anyone know about that? But given this acronym, given the way that my grandpa taught me to think about being connected, I realized that there might be a little more merit here, and that we can think of technology not necessarily as something that always prevents us from connecting with the social world around us or with the spiritual world above us, but that can actually help us bring the two together right in front of, or perhaps even on, our faces. So this app detects when you go into a place of worship. At this point, it's only monotheistic places of worship, but you'll see here that if it were July 13th, this app would have detected that I've just entered a synagogue. It would then ask me if I want to pray. And if I would say yes, it would say, is there a particular scripture that you'd like to pray? And if I'd say yes, it would ask me what it would be, and it would bring it up. So there's one way of thinking about how we can connect these ideas and how technology can be a tool for not only sharing with others, right, but sharing our stories of ourselves with our own Creator. So if there's one key word here I'd like us all to keep in mind, that key word, even above faith, even above uploading, would be connection. And here I return back to another of my grandpa's stories that I'm translating from Spanish. He said, connect is the key word to my message today. If we don't connect, for instance, our television, what program would we see? If we don't connect our radios, what news or music would we hear? If we don't connect our telephones to the fount of energy, to that tower, what message would we receive? And if we don't connect our lights to the outlet, what light would we have? None. You see, my friends, we must stay connected, whether that's through technology or through the stories we tell in analog or through the prayers that we pray. It's all about connection. And so, I thank you. I thank you for listening to these stories. I thank you for sharing with me. And I thank you for praying with me as well. Have a great day.